Richard Boone was born Richard Allen Boone on June 18, 1917, in Los Angeles, California, into a family that valued intellect, discipline, and history. His father was a corporate lawyer, while his mother came from Jewish immigrant ancestry, giving Boone a strong sense of identity and independence. A distant relation of frontiersman Daniel Boone, he carried an almost inherited gravity that later defined his screen presence. Boone's early life blended privilege with rebellion. Though classically educated, he resisted rigid expectations, attending Stanford University to study art before leaving due to academic struggles. Instead of following a conventional path, he worked physically demanding jobs and eventually enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Serving as an aerial gunner in the Pacific, Boone earned respect for courage and resolve. These experiences instilled self-reliance and seriousness, qualities that stayed with him long after he entered the acting world, i.e. the craft before celebrity. After the war, Boone used the GI Bill to study acting at the Actors Studio in New York, immersing himself in method training and disciplined performance. Unlike many actors who chased fame, Boone chased truth. He approached acting as a craft rather than a spectacle, believing performances should reflect emotional authenticity rather than star persona. His early work in theater and supporting film roles revealed his intensity and commanding voice, earning him attention in films like The Robe and Dragnet. However, it was television that brought him lasting recognition. As Dr. Conrad Steiner in Medic, Boone helped pioneer realistic, emotionally grounded storytelling on television. His performances were serious and restrained, never flashy. This mindset later defined his most famous role, Paladin in Have Gun Will Travel, where intelligence, moral ambiguity, and quiet authority replaced traditional Western bravado. Boone's success came not from charm, but from conviction. Bakinsech, the gentleman gunfighter and national fame. When Boone stepped into the role of Paladin in Have Gun Will Travel, he created one of television's most enduring characters. Paladin was not the typical Western hero. He quoted literature, wore refined clothing, and navigated moral dilemmas with thought rather than force. Boone infused the role with intellect and restraint, appealing to audiences seeking something deeper than gunfire and grit. The series ran for 6 successful seasons and turned Boone into a national figure. Yet fame never fully sat comfortably with him. While audiences admired the character, Boone remained cautious of celebrity culture. He valued privacy, artistic control, and personal integrity far more than public approval. Even at the height of success, he resisted Hollywood's social rituals and public displays. This distance from the industry's inner circle would later help explain why Boone made choices that puzzled fans, including his absence from certain highly publicized events. Parallel careers, different worlds. Richard Boone and John Wayne shared the Western genre and appeared in some of the same cinematic circles, including Big Jake. On screen, their dynamic worked because of contrast. Wayne represented a confident, iconic hero, while Boone often played complex antagonists or morally conflicted figures. Off-screen, however, the two men were very different. Wayne embraced Hollywood's star system and public symbolism, while Boone remained reserved and introspective. Boone valued artistic discussion and philosophical debate, preferring smaller creative circles to large social gatherings. Though they worked together professionally, they were never close friends. Their relationship was polite but distant, shaped by mutual professionalism rather than personal warmth. Boone respected dedication to craft, while Wayne embodied cultural mythology. These differences were not necessarily hostile, but they created emotional distance. Understanding this distinction is crucial to understanding why Boone did not feel compelled to participate in public ceremonies tied to Wayne's legacy. A private man in a public industry. One of the most defining aspects of Richard Boone's personality was his discomfort with public spectacle. He often expressed unease with Hollywood's performative traditions, including lavish premieres, press-driven memorials, and ceremonial displays of grief. For Boone, emotion was deeply personal and not meant for public consumption. Mourning, in his view, was something to be experienced privately, not under cameras or public scrutiny. John Wayne's funeral in 1979 was one of the most highly publicized events Hollywood had seen, drawing media attention from around the world. Boone, already withdrawn from mainstream Hollywood, may have felt that attending such an event would conflict with his values. His absence should not be interpreted as disrespect, but rather as consistency. Boone rarely attended events simply because attendance was expected. If something did not align with his sense of authenticity, he chose absence over performance. Health, distance, and life transitions. At the time of John Wayne's death, Richard Boone was no longer in robust health. He had begun experiencing serious medical issues that would later be diagnosed as throat cancer. Travel was increasingly difficult, and long, emotionally intense gatherings were physically taxing. Additionally, Boone had already distanced himself geographically and psychologically from Hollywood. He had lived in Hawaii for several years before eventually settling in St. Augustine, Florida, where he focused on theater, writing, and community engagement. Boone had intentionally stepped away from the industry's center, choosing a quieter, more grounded life. This separation likely influenced his decision not to return to Hollywood for major events. He was no longer participating in the industry's social rhythms. From Boone's perspective, absence was not a statement, but a continuation of a life he had already chosen, one defined by introspection rather than visibility. See for what was a principle over expectation. Richard Boone was known among friends and colleagues as a man guided by principle rather than public expectation. He was independent, sometimes stubborn, and deeply thoughtful. If he believed an action would feel insincere, he simply would not do it. Attending John Wayne's funeral may have felt obligatory rather than meaningful to him. Boone did not share in the public idolization that surrounded Wayne, nor did he feel the need to demonstrate respect through attendance. His respect, when given, was quiet and personal. Boone understood that absence would spark speculation, yet he chose personal integrity over public interpretation. That choice was consistent with how he lived his life. He did not explain himself publicly, nor did he attempt to manage narratives. Boone trusted that those who understood him would recognize his silence not as dismissal, but as reflection. A life beyond Hollywood applause. In his later years, Boone devoted himself to cultural work outside Hollywood's spotlight. In St. Augustine, Florida, he became deeply involved in regional theater, notably the historical production Cross and Sword. He also served as Florida's cultural ambassador, advocating for the arts at a grassroots level. Boone taught acting, wrote opinion columns, and mentored students, finding fulfillment in contribution rather than acclaim. These pursuits reflected his belief that art should serve community, not ego. Hollywood fame, once achieved, no longer defined him. By the time of Wayne's passing, Boone had already mentally closed that chapter. His life had moved forward into quieter, more meaningful spaces. The absence from a major Hollywood funeral fits this trajectory. Boone had chosen where his energy belonged, and it was no longer in the ceremonial world of celebrity remembrance. Remembered on his own terms. Richard Boone passed away on January 10, 1981, at the age of 63, following complications from throat cancer. He faced illness with the same resolve that marked his life, remaining at home and surrounded by loved ones. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii, a place that had brought him peace. Boone's legacy endures not because of public appearances, but because of the depth he brought to his work and the integrity with which he lived. His absence from John Wayne's funeral was not an act of defiance, but a reflection of who he was, a private man in a public profession. In the end, Boone chose authenticity over ceremony, silence over spectacle. That choice, like his performances, was deliberate, thoughtful, and unmistakably his own.